Very good morning. Welcome along to Crime Vlog Weekly. My name is Hartley. Hope you guys are doing fine over there, wherever you are. North America, South America, Australia, and of course the UK. Not forgetting the African continent. If this is your first time, welcome. My name is Hartley, and I've been interested in crime for years. Never been in trouble myself, but I do love the stories and the interesting factors within crime stories all around the world. But mainly, we most of all, we focus mainly, I should say, in crime around North America. Now and again, over here, yes, in the UK, but we seem to, for some reason, get the most interesting cases up there in North America. Okay, right. This particular video, we're going to focus back on the Karen Reed Roadshow, I should say. Um, After 3 months of trial in over there in Boston, Massachusetts, with Judge Cannuni, Beverly Cannuni, um, the trial of Karen Reed was declared a mistrial. Okay, um, most people and all the votes and the comments that was flowing around this particular trial thought that she would have been found not guilty on all charges, and it turned out to be a mistrial. Um, it has been said by many that the judge had seemed to be very biased within this and also helping the um, prosecution along the way within this trial, which made it very unfair for Karen Reed. Um, Lots and lots of evidence was kept away from the jury. Jury wasn't aware of many things that was happening, such as the FBI investigation into a lot of the police officers within this particular case. I think there were at least probably five or six officers that gave evidence, and uh, this this situation was very confusing for the jury because they had two stories. What it was, Karen Reed was being charged for a hit and run incident and leaving her boyfriend outside in the freezing cold to die. And obviously, the defense was saying no, it was not Karen Reed. Someone within the house, that's that house just behind me, you can see there, someone within that house um, somehow did something that led to the death of John O'Keefe. He's the one in the uniform right at the bottom. Not sure which side you're sitting looking at it, but on my left, I'm looking at the screen. So on my left, that's him down there, John O'Keefe, R.I.P. He lost his life at that particular home. Um, the problems we've got there is that this was being investigated by a senior detective, and his name was Proctor. Um, Proctor did not investigate this case as he should have. Obviously, they were all police officers within that house on that particular night the incident took place. They were having an after party. Many of the police was together, and Proctor seemed to ignore making getting statements from all these people that was in the house on the night. He totally ignored that, and he tend to have listened to someone by the name of Jennifer McCarb, took everything she said and run with it to try to lay all the charges on Karen Reed. As I said, first it was just a hit and run situation, then it turned out then the further charges, which made it into second degree murder. Anyhow, as I said, bringing you up to speed on things, on just over about 8, 9 days ago, she was found. Uh, it was found as a mistrial. It was declared as a mistrial by the judge after the jury was sent out 2 or 3 times and could not come to a full decision um, to find her guilty. Now, up to date as far as yesterday, the jury are now coming forward to say that they were very confused on giving the verdict. Apparently, from what I can understand, they seem to have a verdict slip which which had numerous charges on it, and it was very confusing. It was not explained fully clearly for them how they should fill this particular form in towards the end of the deliberation. And with all with all the in and outs from court back into the jury room, being sent back out by the judge, they thought, well, they could. They no, there wasn't advised. Actually, I should say, they weren't advised that they can let the judge know uh, which count they they have found guilty and which one was not. The judge actually kept that quiet. She, as I said, there seemed to be some sort of bias going on there because, as far as I'm concerned, as a citizen, you need justice, justice for everyone, and fair justice. And you, to me, the judge should have advised the jury that you've got, say, four, or whether it was five different charges, and you should be able to come to either guilty on all five, or guilty on two, guilty on one, whatever, and then let the judge know where you're at. Even if you found guilty on four and one is not, you should let the judge know that you cannot come to a decision on the rest of them. In this case now, as this is days and days after the mistrial, the jury said they were very confused, and they has actually now come out and said they found Karen Reid not guilty on murder one, not guilty on um, the third um, the third charge also, and they were sort of 50-50 on count number two. This was not made clear to the defense, nor was it made clear to the um, prosecution. Maybe the prosecution know, because as I said, it seemed to be some sort of collusion between the prosecution and the judge. I don't know, but from looking on it as a citizen from the outside, and there were many comments on the across the internet about this, that the judge seemed to be helping out the prosecution wherever she can. And in this case, justice did not seem to be going the right way for Karen Reid, because surely when the uh, when the jury said that they cannot come to a decision, the judge should have asked, okay, well, have you come to any um, conclusion on any of the charges? Because don't forget, there were approximately 4 or 5 charges laid down in front of them, and this was not asked. So the judge, because if you remember, the judge sent the jury back in 3 times to deliberate. They came out and said, no, we cannot make a decision. The judge sent them back in and said, well, you haven't had enough time. Following day again, they deliberated all day. Same situation again. The judge read a ruling to them, and they went back in again and could not come to the decision. Then finally, on the Monday, the final day, they come back again and said, we definitely cannot make a decision. And if we're forced to make a decision, that means that we might be going in the wrong direction. That was accepted then by the judge, and this is when she declared the mistrial. But she did not give the opportunity to the defense nor the prosecution to to ask any questions. She just dismissed the jury and sent them all home. Obviously, the defense was very happy because at least they come out with a win, and that win was that Karen Reid is not guilty, and yes, and there was obviously opportunity to retry the case again. But now we've got some legal problems because the the jury is saying, well, we did not find her guilty on two of the charges, so we cannot retry, or I should say, it should not be for Karen Reid to be retried again on these two charges. We're especially saying she was not guilty for murder two. So the judge is going to have to make her mind up whether or not to retry this case and leave those two charges out. She's definitely going to have to get advice on that herself, but as we know, seem to be a lot of bias going on, so she might not want to do that. But I think it's a constitutional situation here, which obviously I think is going to possibly need a hearing to speak to all the jurors first, and hopefully the judge and her superiors will come to the decision that they're going to have to drop those two charges before the retrial of the outstanding charges. So hopefully this is going to go in the right direction for Karen Reid. Other things that's been happening since then is been, as I said earlier, there were things that was kept away from the jury for whatever reason, but we're not sure why they kept this out. But the FBI was investigating the chief detective in this case. I should say the leading detective. His name is Proctor. He was under investigation for the handling of this particular case. And what actually happened, the FBI, while investigating him, they handed over documents to the court. This is before the trial even actually started. This is during the pre-trial situation. They handed over documents because they felt that there's no way they can let this case go forward of prosecuting Karen Reid with the information that they knew. So they handed over documents to both sides, which is the prosecution and the defense. And quickly, the defense asked the judge to dismiss the case when all that information came out about the detectives. Not only the chief detective, there is other people being investigated by the FBI, but the main one was the chief investigating officer. His name is Proctor. As I said, Judge Clooney, Beverly Clooney, she dismissed that and she opted to go ahead with the trial. And as I said, also lots of this evidence was kept away from the jury throughout the case. Many times the defense did try to get things in, and there was lots and lots of objections. In my other videos, I did say, let the truth come out, because that way it's justice. Let everything come out. Let the jury decide for themselves what's right, what's wrong. So once the fact is there, then the jury can decide, because as you remember, the prosecution is charging Karen Reid for hit and run incident. They actually said she reversed her car 30 miles or 22.5 miles per hour and hit her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, 30 feet up in the air and left him outside to die in freezing cold. That was the prosecution. The defense said, no, that did not happen. Karen Reid actually dropped her boyfriend off at that home behind me to the after party. She watched him walk towards the house. She then drove away back to the home, which is John O'Keefe's home. That's where she's been living with John O'Keefe's two step, I think, son and daughter. And she was back at home and made a few phone calls during the course of that night. But what the defense is actually saying is that someone in that home know exactly what's happened, and something did happen on that particular night, and they're all colluding and making up stories and putting it over onto Karen Reed. And this was put across pretty well by the defense. They even had expert lawyers, expert witnesses that actually came in to say that uh, this it was definitely not a car that made the caused the incidents and the damage on John O'Keefe. He did have a lot of bruises and scratches on his um, right arm, and all that was the only one, except for a big gash at the back of his head, and his eyes was sort of puffy and black and blue. Let's put it that way. Um, the defense said it looked like he's been into a fight with Mike Tyson. That's the way how it had looked. Nothing like a car accident. And obviously, the experts um, admitted that this was definitely not a car incident because they've seen or been worked on many of these type of car situations and hasn't from what they've seen and the evidence they had in front of them, it did not look like a car incident. So there you go. There was also a dog expert that came in to say that the scratches on Karen Reed's the scratches on John O'Keefe's arm definitely from a dog, and this is from the dog expert. And uh, the that dog expert tried to get deep into um, what they know about dogs, scratches, and so forth. And a lot of that evidence was also objected and held back by the judge. Um, but so there was just so much in it there for the jury to come back and say not guilty because you've got two scenarios there. It's supposed to be a hit and run. On the other case, it looks like something happened in that particular house. All those police um, seem to have got together and made up this story to try to make everything look right. There was lots and lots of untruths from the police officers. You have to ask yourself why. Why was the police lying so much in this? What were they covering up? What did they know that they're not coming forward about? And obviously, the jury saw all this, and as we know now, the jury came back and said they could not come to a unanimous decision. But um, we are not sure whether they told the judge this and she's holding this back. But they're now, after the case, they're now saying that none of them came to the decision that this was a guilty verdict for murder. So this is where we're at. As I said, it's a constitutional problem at the moment. So we're in a difficult situation, and I can actually say Karen Reed is in a very good position because the prosecution said they want to uh, come back to the judge sometime end of July 2024 and ask for her to retry on all the charges again. So we don't think that's going to happen in any case because what's happened now, up to date, is that Proctor has been dismissed without pay. He's been relieved of all his duties um, as a chief leading investigator. So he no longer have the job. That's one thing. And also Kevin Albert, the home homeowner there. He's also been relieved of his job. I think he's still on pay, but he's been relieved at present. But I think they need to be, probably there's going to be another meeting, and he's possibly going to be relieved totally from his job. And that's going to continue because there's, as I said, there's probably another 3 or 4 officers who was involved in this case who's also been under investigation by the FBI. As I said earlier, lots of this FBI information was kept away from the jury. So, which is, as I said, that's not justice. So, it's possibly that this district attorney may throw this case out because it's looking very embarrassing for the police in that particular area, and the public is not happy. They're definitely not happy at what they heard went on in this particular case. So with the lead investigator gone now, and also one of the homeowner being did I say the home? No, his name is Kevin Albert. He's connected to that particular home. He is one of the Boston police officers. He's been relieved of his duties on this. So, sorry. If there is going to be another case, these guys will have to come up and give evidence and probably have to say why they were dismissed. So, which is not going to be too clever for the prosecution. So it's a possibility they might throw the whole case out because it's a very messy case, very, very messy. There's been too many lies, too many things kept back. It ended abruptly when it shouldn't have ended like that. Okay, for those of you who are not sure about this particular case or for the first time watching this case, I'm gonna play a clip from the defense lawyer of Karen Reed, which should bring you up to date on really what the case was all about. Here we go.
Karen Reed was framed. A car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did. You will learn that it was no accident that John O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of 34 Fairview Road in Canton on January 29th of 2022. You will learn that at that address lived a well-known and well-connected law enforcement family in Canton, the Alberts. Because the Alberts were involved, and because they had close connections to the investigators in this case, Karen Reed was framed for a murder she did not commit. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As I previously told you, my name is David Yannetti. I'm an attorney with an office in Boston. Together with attorneys Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little, it is truly my privilege and my honor to represent Karen Reed during this trial. From a very early juncture in this case, you will question the Commonwealth's theory of the case. You will question the quality of the Commonwealth's evidence. You will question the veracity of the Commonwealth's witnesses. And you will question their shoddy and biased investigation, a faulty investigation that led to Karen Reed sitting here today. You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case, and you will question why. You'll question why the investigators had such tunnel vision. You'll question why they focused solely on Karen Reed, someone with no ties to the Canton Police Department, as opposed to the well-known and well-connected Albert family of Canton, a family that was never treated as suspects by the investigators in this case. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn. His body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found wearing only one sneaker. You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police officer was injured and unresponsive on his front lawn, and Brian Albert did nothing. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, an ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing, and first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house. Equally important for you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that night. You'll learn that Brian Albert's brother, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer. It was obvious very early on that the Canton police should not be investigating the death of a man found on the property of the brother of a Canton police officer. So it was decided just about from the start that the Massachusetts State Police should take complete control of this investigation, because the Canton police were conflicted out. Now, that sounded good at the time, but you'll learn that two major problems arose. First, despite the fact that they obviously had a conflict of interest, the evidence will show that the Canton police still had their hands in this investigation. You will find it astounding. But Canton police officer Kevin Albert, the reason for the conflict of interest in the first place, was continually updated about the status of this investigation while it was going on. Second, and equally troubling, is that the lead state police detective who was assigned to this case was a man named Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor, you will learn, is one of the many people in Canton with deep ties to the Albert family. Michael Proctor's own mother refers to the Alberts as the Proctor's second family. His own sister's wedding, Michael Proctor was in the wedding party with Colin Albert. And he sat at the head table of that wedding with members of the Albert family. That's the man who was chosen to lead the investigation into the suspicious death on the property of Brian Albert. That's the man who gave updates to Canton police officer Kevin Albert, while the state police were supposed to be investigating what had occurred at his brother Brian Albert's house. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called for crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other trace evidence within the home. He never asked Brian Albert for permission to go in the home and take a look around. Michael Proctor never applied for a search warrant to go in that home. Instead, he focused immediately and exclusively on Karen Reed, the outsider. You will learn that no one in the Proctor family has ever called the Reed family their second family. No one in the Proctor family had been in a wedding party with anyone from the Reed family. Karen Reed was a convenient outsider. She was most definitely not from Canton. But how did Michael Proctor feel about her? How did he treat somebody he was investigating at a point in time when he should have been keeping an open mind and focusing on obtaining all possible evidence so that he didn't miss anything? Well, you will learn that on the very day that John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor was texting with his high school buddies about this supposedly secret investigation using his personal cell phone. He was revealing information about this investigation to his friends, assuming that nobody would ever find out what he was doing and what he was saying. And he was revealing his true thoughts about Karen Reed to his friends, not what he put in his sanitized police reports, his true feelings to his friends who he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense in this case. Lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names you would reserve only for your worst enemies. He told his friends that he hoped that she would kill herself. He told his friends that he had seized her cell phone. And you will learn that he knew he shouldn't have been accessing any content on her cell phone because he knew there would likely be attorney-client communications on between Karen and me at that time. He knew that he was supposed to wait for a search warrant or other permission from a judge in order to go through that phone. But you'll learn that he went through the phone anyway, without permission. And you'll know that he did because he told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed. And he was disappointed he hadn't found any yet. That is the professional and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. You'll learn that one of Michael Proctor's high school friends commented to him that with a dead body on the front lawn, the homeowner in this case is surely going to catch a lot of grief. And you know what Michael Proctor's response to that was? One word. Nope. And he explained why. Michael Proctor assured his buddies that the homeowner would not catch a lot of grief because, quote, the homeowner's a Boston cop too. End quote. That one sentence, ladies and gentlemen, in Michael Proctor's own words, will explain a lot to you about how this investigation was conducted. You will be able to evaluate whether Trooper Michael Proctor treated Brian Albert and his family differently because of who they are and the relationships between his family and theirs. You will evaluate whether this investigation...
As I did say earlier, Michael Proctor has now been dismissed from the police force without pay. This happened directly after the case. So far, basically, everything that the defense for Karen Reed opening statements has proven to be true. Almost everything they said at the beginning of the trial, once the facts came out, it was absolutely true. So, you know, as I said, the reason I'm playing this clip's back because the opening statements, we were there to see, well, we heard both sides, but we really had to go through the trial to really believe that these police was colluding together to frame Karen Reed and get her put away for at least 50 years plus without parole. Gonna let you listen to the rest of it here with David Yannetti.
Investigation was on the up and up. You will decide, as a result, how valuable or worthless the prosecution's DNA evidence is or is not, in light of who controlled that evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor's fingerprints are figuratively all over this case. His fingerprints are all over the Commonwealth's evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor showed up at Karen Reed's parents' house in Dighton to interview her during the afternoon of January 29th, only hours after John O'Keefe's body was found dead on Brian Albert's front lawn. You'll learn that Michael Proctor had her Lexus SUV towed from her parents' home. But you'll also learn that he wrote a search warrant in which he falsified the time that he took that SUV. He swore under oath that the vehicle wasn't towed until 5:30 p.m. But you'll learn that we obtained surveillance footage that he didn't know we would get. And that surveillance footage exposed that Michael Proctor's words in that sworn affidavit were a lie.
There you go. There you go. There was so many lies by this lead investigator, Michael Proctor. No wonder they dismissed him without pay. As with the opening statements there by David Yannetti, he took the vehicle at he actually took the vehicle at 4:30 p.m. But in his statements, he wrote it that he took the vehicle at 5:30 p.m. He had his reasons for doing that. No one took photographs, as far as we know. They weren't produced. No one took photographs of the car while it was taken from Karen Reed's home, and that definitely would have proven whether or not the rear taillight was broken, smashed, or what. The tow truck driver, as far as we know, did not take any photographs, and even if he did, that means that Proctor has kept those to himself and did not produce them.
Michael Proctor had that vehicle for about 90 minutes before he claimed to have taken it. And folks, you will learn that the timing is important, very important. Because when John O'Keefe was first found on Brian Albert's front lawn, the police thoroughly searched that yard for potential evidence. And it wasn't just one officer, or two, or three. There were at least 4 officers that searched that front lawn. And that morning was the beginning of a snowstorm, but there wasn't yet much snow on the ground when they were searching that lawn. It was light out by the time they did the search, and it was getting lighter. And during that thorough search of Brian Albert's front lawn, the number of pieces of taillight that were found by a minimum of 4 officers looking for evidence was 0. It was only later in the day, when the snow was really starting to accumulate, that the police miraculously started to find pieces of taillight on the property. The police only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had seized Karen Reed's car. They only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had possession of her taillight. You'll learn that Trooper Michael Proctor then kept going back to the Albert residence after that day, and he claims to have kept finding pieces of taillight on multiple occasions on multiple different days. And in addition, a good week after John O'Keefe's death, Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz, an older officer on the brink of retirement with probably not the best eyesight, he supposedly was happened to be driving past Brian Albert's house. And by the way, Brian Albert is someone with whom Chief Berkowitz is also good friends. And this older man allegedly spotted yet another piece of taillight from his moving vehicle. This was yet another piece of taillight that was somehow missed by the trained specialists who had previously and thoroughly searched the property. Another piece of taillight that Proctor supposedly missed in the many times he went back to the property. Michael Proctor claims that he kept finding pieces of taillight right up until February 18th of 2022, which was nearly 3 weeks after John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn. You will learn that there is no competent evidence that Karen Reed's taillight shattered at Brian Albert's property in the early morning hours of January 29th of 2022. To the contrary, you'll learn that when Karen left John at Brian Albert's house, she drove back to John's house on Meadows Ave across town in Canton. At John's home, where he lived with his 2 adopted children, Karen was drifting in and out of sleep, but she woke up for good in a panic sometime around 4 a.m. because John hadn't come home. And that was not like him at all. He had never done that before. Karen had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Something was seriously wrong. So she got back into her Lexus and she backed up out of the garage to leave the driveway. And when she did, the right rear taillight of her Lexus struck John's parked vehicle in the driveway and her taillight cracked. That was the same taillight that the prosecution now claims was broken outside the Albert residence hours earlier at 12:38. But we have video evidence that the taillight was actually broken at 5 a.m., many hours after the prosecution needs that taillight to have been broken. There is, of course, no video of the taillight being broken at Brian Albert's house. You will eventually conclude that that's because the taillight was not broken there. Importantly, you will learn that there was an eyewitness who arrived at 34 Fairview after Karen got there with John O'Keefe in the early morning hours of January 29th. And that eyewitness, Brian Nagel, was the brother of Julie Nagel, who was at the after-hours party that night. He had a clear view of Karen's SUV. Brian Nagel confirms that there was no damage to her taillight at that time. Karen was sitting in the driver's seat with her hands at 10 and 2. And Ryan Nagel confirms that while Karen was inside the car, John O'Keefe was not. John O'Keefe was also not outside the car at that time. You will ultimately conclude there's only one other place he could have been. Now, going back to that 5 a.m. video from John's driveway, you will see Karen back up her Lexus and strike John's car at about 5 a.m. when she was leaving John's house to go out to look for him. And you will know that she struck his car at 5 a.m. because you will watch that video closely. You will witness that the wheels and the hubcaps on John's car are jostled and moved by Karen's SUV. And you will conclude that that video depicts exactly when Karen's taillight was cracked, long after she dropped off John that night at 34 Fairview. And you will learn that part of the reason that Karen's Lexus hit John's car was that Karen was panicked at that time. Where is John? Why didn't he come home? What happened to him? And you will learn that she was racking her brain for what possibly could have happened. And like many of us, was worried about the worst. Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? That was what she was saying, both to herself and to other people later that morning when she went back to 34 Fairview. She couldn't think of anything else that made sense. She certainly didn't consider in a million years that someone from within the Albert home could have beaten up John and left him to die on the front lawn. Now, that was over 2 years ago. Karen didn't know then what you will learn during this trial. Karen didn't know that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house sometime after Karen pulled away. She didn't know that after Jennifer McCabe dropped off some people elsewhere, she returned to her own home. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe climbed some stairs in her home and eventually made it into her bedroom with her cell phone. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe settled in at 2:27 in the morning on January 29th, 2022, and typed a Google search that she would later delete. 2:27 in the morning was over 3 hours before John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's lawn. 2:27 was over 3 hours before anyone knew or suspected that John O'Keefe was missing or hurt or in trouble. And at 2:27 in the morning, you will learn that with no one watching her, thinking she was alone with her thoughts, not worrying that anyone would know what she was doing, Jennifer McCabe typed in the following Google search: how long to die in the cold? Now, she misspelled the first word, so the actual search was how long to die in the cold, but you'll get the point.
That was a very important point that came out in the case. This Jennifer McCabe Googling how long to die, how long for a body to freeze and die in the cold. Um, in my past videos, I've said if we can find that out and if the defense can prove this, the case ends. That means Karen Read absolutely should be freed. And yes, they brought they had phone data and they got the experts in and they were able to prove that yes, this phone call was made at 2:30 a.m. So now, obviously, it was down to the jury to who do they believe? Do they believe the prosecution witness who's saying that it it happened at 6:30 in the morning, and there's reasons why it looked like it was 2:30 a.m., or do you believe the defense lawyer who um, had more experience than the prosecution witness about phones and phone data and what happens behind the scenes digitally? But I think the defense absolutely proved that Jennifer McCabe was the one who made that phone call at 2:30 a.m. And the only reason that she would make that phone call is because there was something wrong. That means that something happened in that house with John O'Keefe, and everyone in that house had to get their stories right and obviously try to put the blame on Karen Read.
You will ask yourself, why would somebody Google how long does it take for someone to die in the cold, unless that person knew someone who either was in that situation or would be in that situation? You will question during this trial, who was it who actually did die in the cold at some point that night, sometime after Jen McCabe was asking Google for an answer to her question. And you'll learn that the answer to that question was John O'Keefe. The medical examiner in this case will testify that one of the causes of John O'Keefe's death was hypothermia. John O'Keefe died in part because he was left to die in the cold. Now, the Commonwealth will try to dispute the timing of that Google search. They'll try to claim that there were only 2 Google searches at 6:23 and 6:24 a.m. after John's body was found. But one problem for the Commonwealth will be that we have retained Richard Green, one of the leading computer forensic experts in the country. Rick Green has forensically analyzed Jennifer McCabe's phone, both manually and using every appropriate type of computer software to solve this issue. Rick Green will confirm for you that Jennifer McCabe did indeed make that search at 2:27 a.m. And another problem for the Commonwealth is that you will hear and see other evidence that will confirm that Jennifer McCabe is lying when she denies making that Google search at 2:27 a.m. You will conclude that before she went to bed, if she went to bed that night, Jennifer McCabe wanted to know just how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. And a big question in this trial for you will be, when was John O'Keefe left to die in the cold? I expect the Commonwealth will try to persuade you that he was left there sometime around 12:30 a.m. because they're going to try to prove to you that Karen Read hit him and that his body stayed there the entire night until first responders arrived at 6 a.m. and his body was taken to the hospital.
As we found out during the trial, that this business about Karen Read dropping John O'Keefe and hitting John O'Keefe with her car and leaving him in the cold. If you look on it that way, to say that yes, okay, she hit him and left him in the cold on the front yard of that particular home behind me. If that did happen, what about the people that was at the after party? There were 11 to 12 or even up to 13 people in that house at the after party that night. Also, there were a couple of people that come to drop off or to pick up people from that house. So how comes no one saw a body lying sometime between 12:30 and 2:30 a.m. in the morning? They didn't. Absolutely not. They did not see someone, well, John O'Keefe, lying at the front, dying in the cold. So this would have to have happened after 2:30 a.m. So if something did happen in the house, somehow the body of John O'Keefe ended up on the front yard after 2:30 in the morning. That time, as we know, Karen Reed was back at her home because proven later was that the Wi-Fi was activated back at I think it was 12:40 a.m. back at John O'Keefe's house. So that proved that Karen Reed did arrive back home after dropping off John O'Keefe at the after party.
But you will learn that there are big problems with the Commonwealth's theory of this case. You will learn that there were 6 people at that after-hours party at Brian Albert's house, all of whom left by the front door and would have been confronted by John O'Keefe's lifeless body on that lawn if he was actually there at that time. Those 6 people walked out the front door to 34 Fairview, walked to their cars, either in the driveway or parked in front of the house. Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, was there. Her husband, Matthew McCabe, was there. ATF federal agent Brian Higgins was there, who was also Brian Albert's friend. Sarah Levinson, a friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. Julie Nagel, another friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. And Caitlin Albert, Brian Albert's daughter, was also there. All of them leaving the residence. Each of those people left 34 Fairview in Canton, where Brian Albert lived. Each of them walked out facing the front lawn, where the Commonwealth will tell you that a 6'2", nearly 220-pound big man in dark clothing was sprawled on the front lawn when there was only a dusting of white snow on the ground. He was supposedly sprawled on that lawn, just feet from where these people were walking when they left the residence. And you will learn that not one of these people saw John O'Keefe laying. Not one. And you know who else saw no one laying outside in the early morning hours of January 29th? The snowplow driver in charge of plowing the street for the city of Canton. And this is another big problem for the Commonwealth. You will learn that Michael Proctor, here's that name again, wrote a report where he claimed that the DPW supervisor had told him that Fairview Road had not been plowed that night. Proctor.
Yeah, this is very interesting here with Proctor again, getting back to Proctor, the lead chief investigator. He actually tried to deny that the streets was clear of snow that night, that the plow driver did not work on that particular street, 34 Fairview, on that night. He actually did not want this snowplow driver to attend in court to give evidence on behalf of the defense or the prosecution, because this would have put a lot of doubts to the theory. So gonna let you get a little bit more from David Yanity on this.
His total investigation on this issue consisted of one phone call and no follow-up. He just submitted his report that simply said the road hadn't been plowed that night, perhaps thinking that no one else would follow up either. But you'll learn that when it came to finding out the truth, it's not that Proctor couldn't find the truth, it's that he wouldn't. But fortunately, you'll learn that we would, and we did. You'll learn that within weeks after January 29th, we sent our investigator, a former Medford police officer named Paul Makowski, to the Canton DPW to try to get to the bottom of this. Paul Makowski talked to the same supervisor at the DPW, a man named Michael Trotta, whom Proctor claimed had told him that the street hadn't been plowed that night. You'll learn that Paul Makowski found out that Michael Proctor was not telling the truth. You'll learn that Michael Trotta from the DPW told Paul Makowski, our investigator, that the street was indeed plowed that night, and that the name of the plow driver was Brian Laughlin. So Paul Makowski tracked down Brian Laughlin. He asked Mr. Laughlin if the state police or any investigators had ever spoken to him. And the answer came back, no. You will then learn what Brian Laughlin had to say about what he saw and didn't see that night, and you will be shocked. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski that he was driving a big snowplow in Canton that night. You'll learn that the nickname for it at the DPW was Frankenstein, because it had a lot of spare parts and it had been around forever. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski that when he plows the streets of Canton in Frankenstein, he's very careful. He makes sure to check not only the roads in front of him, but also the yards to the side of his plow. He makes sure not to hit a fire hydrant or a tree or an animal, or heaven forbid, a person lying in the snow. He's always on the lookout. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin passed by 34 Fairview in his plow, traveling right by Brian Albert's front lawn at 2:30 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin confirms that at about 2:30, when he went by that house, John O'Keefe was not on that front lawn. So you'll learn that about 2 hours after the Commonwealth claims that Karen Reed somehow incapacitated John O'Keefe, an eyewitness confirms that not only could it not have happened, but it didn't happen. But you'll learn that Brian Laughlin also provides some other troubling testimony for the Commonwealth. You'll learn that after making that pass at 2:30 in the morning and seeing no body, he showed up again at the entrance to Fairview Road, intending to make another pass down it with his plow. This time, however, at about 3:30 in the morning, he looked down the street and he saw that parked right next to Brian Albert's front lawn, right in the very area where John O'Keefe's body was later found at 6 a.m., Brian Laughlin saw a Ford Edge parked on the side of the road. You will learn that the police have done zero investigation to discover whose Ford Edge that was. You'll learn that members of the Albert family drove Ford Edges. You'll learn that the police to this day claim not to know who was parked right next to the area where John O'Keefe's body was later found. You will learn that while investigators on this case, including Michael Proctor, completely ignored the snowplow driver who went right by the Albert residence, the defense not only tracked him down and interviewed him, but the plow driver actually took our investigator on a ride back past the residence to explain the precise route that he had taken on January 29th. You'll learn that some other curious things were going on in the early morning hours of January 29th. Curious things that the police in this case utterly failed to investigate. For example, after people left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house on January 29, Brian Albert claimed that he had no contact with anyone but his wife until he was woken up in the morning. But you will learn that he was ultimately confronted by the fact that his phone records revealed that he had actually placed a phone call to ATF agent Brian Higgins, his friend, the same friend who had been at his house earlier that night. And that was at 2:22 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Higgins called him back 17 seconds later, and they connected 22 seconds on their cell phones. You'll be asked to consider just how long 22 seconds is and what could be said and discussed during that long of a phone call. You will consider that phone call in the context of the other curious things that were going on during the early morning hours of January 29th. You will learn about the following in chronological order. 2:12 a.m., Jennifer McCabe arrives at her home. 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert calls Brian Higgins. 2:22 a.m., 17 seconds later, Higgins calls him back. And Brian Albert and Brian Higgins are on the phone together for 22 seconds. 2:23 a.m., Jennifer McCabe climbs the stairs to her bedroom. 2:27 a.m. Jennifer McCabe searches on Google how long to die in the cold. 2:30 a.m. Plow driver Brian Laughlin confirms there was no body on Brian Albert's front lawn. 3:30 a.m. Brian Laughlin confirms that a Ford Edge was parked right where John O'Keefe's body was later found. The Commonwealth will not be able to successfully dispute any of those facts, yet I expect that they will persist in asking you to convict Karen Read anyway. You will learn that there are other major problems with the Commonwealth's theory. You'll learn that when John O'Keefe was found, he did not look like he had been hit by a car. You'll learn that he looked to have been attacked and beaten up. You'll learn that John O'Keefe was a large 6'2" man who, if positioned behind a Lexus SUV, would have had his torso completely exposed to the rear of that vehicle, including to the tail light. You'll learn that no part of his torso was injured. There was no bruising, no ridges, no scratches, no punctures. You'll learn that his chest and hips and legs were pristine, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he was hit by a 6,000-pound vehicle. The evidence will show that what was not pristine was his right arm. You will take one look at that arm, and you will conclude that a car did not cause those injuries. The injuries to John O'Keefe's arm appear to be consistent with scratch marks and claw marks, marks that make it look as though an animal had attacked his arm. But you won't have to rely just on your common sense when you look at those photos. You'll hear from an expert forensic pathologist who is world-renowned, who has personally conducted thousands of autopsies. And he will testify that those marks are consistent with scratch and claw marks and bite marks from an animal, including a German Shepherd. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe, was a German Shepherd. You'll learn that Brian Albert has admitted that this dog is not good around strangers. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, John O'Keefe would have been a stranger to that dog. And you'll learn that Chloe had been the beloved family dog for the Alberts for 7 years.
Yeah, holding it there. Chloe, which is the dog, the family dog, the defense argued their theory was that the scratches on John O'Keefe's arm when he was later found and the autopsy was done, they claim that the scratches was from a dog and possibly a German Shepherd dog. And what we learned during the facts as it came out in the case was that the dog was gotten rid of straight after the case started. The family got rid of their lovely pet, got rid of it for whatever reason, possibly so the other side could not get any DNA to match against John O'Keefe's arm. Also, while we're at it, the house was also sold, and before it was sold, the basement was also redecorated. So there was lots of funny business going on within that house and the family of that house straight after the death of John O'Keefe.
The Albert family loved Chloe. And strangely, as we discuss this dog today, the Albert family doesn't have its beloved Chloe anymore. You'll learn that Brian Albert was called to testify before the grand jury regarding this matter in April of 2022, and that he did testify about his German Shepherd, Chloe, during that grand jury testimony. And you'll learn that not long after that testimony, Brian Albert and his family rehomed their beloved family dog. They gave away their family dog, and Chloe, the German Shepherd, is therefore now gone. Now, the Commonwealth will try to take your attention away from all of these troubling facts and try to persuade you not to consider their shocking lack of investigation of anyone else, not to consider John O'Keefe's injuries, not to consider the fact that multiple people left the residence and saw no body, not to consider the fact that the snowplow driver was specifically looking at 2:30 a.m. and there was nobody there, not to consider the fact that two people in the house were communicating at 2:22 a.m. but denied speaking to each other for 22 seconds, and not to consider the fact that one of their witnesses, who was also present at the home, was unusually curious at 2:27 a.m. about how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. Commonwealth will instead try to persuade you that Karen Reed supposedly had a motive to kill John O'Keefe because they were not getting along. You'll hear about their trip to Aruba over New Year's Eve and that Karen was upset that John had been flirting with another woman. And you will hear that Karen considered exploring her options after that trip, which led her to a get-together at one point with ATF federal agent Brian Higgins, although that never went anywhere. But you'll also hear that in January of 2022, after the Aruba trip, and not long before January 28th and 29th, John O'Keefe was making long-term plans with Karen, including a family trip with her and the kids, and also another trip with Karen and another couple for months into the future. And you'll see video of how John and Karen were interacting on the night in question. You'll see for yourself how they looked at each other from the video at the waterfall that night. Nobody who saw them that night saw anything wrong. There was nothing wrong. I mean, like any couples, occasionally they would bicker or disagree. But you will hear zero evidence of any domestic violence in that home whatsoever. John never raised a hand in anger toward Karen, and Karen never raised a hand in anger toward John. That simply wasn't who they are. You will conclude the notion that Karen Reed chose the start of a snowstorm to suddenly become violent out of the blue for the first time and intentionally kill her boyfriend by hitting him with her car and leaving him there with a house full of people inside is patently ridiculous. You will also learn that what's not ridiculous is that someone, not Karen Reed, ambushed John O'Keefe. Somebody probably didn't mean to kill him, but somebody went too far. You'll learn that Trooper Proctor failed to investigate motives that other people had to harm John O'Keefe. You'll learn that Proctor failed to investigate anything or anyone who was in the Albert residence that night. You'll learn that he failed to investigate the antagonistic relationship between members of the Albert family and John O'Keefe. You'll learn that apparently nobody investigates the Albert family of Canton. Remember, on day one, Trooper Proctor was asked whether the homeowner, Brian Albert, would catch a lot of grief. And Trooper Proctor himself said, "No, homeowner's a Boston cop too." So folks, the trial is now about to start, and the witnesses are about to start testifying. On behalf of Karen Reed, I ask that you do two things during this trial. First, I ask that you pay attention to all of the evidence. The way trials work, the prosecution gets to present its case first. They conduct their direct examinations first. So we respectfully ask that you wait for us. We will get to cross-examine their witnesses, and you will find that cross-examination is the key that unlocks the truth. Wait for us. You'll be glad that you did. Second, I ask that you keep your eye on the ball. You have one job and one job only to do during this trial, and that job, quite frankly, is not to solve this case. Your only job during this trial is to determine whether the Commonwealth, the prosecution, has proven to you each and every element of the crimes they have charged, beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty. The prosecution will fail to prove this case to a moral certainty. They will fail to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. You will reasonably doubt their case because their theory of the case does not make sense. You will reasonably doubt their case because Karen Reed was framed, and the evidence shows that, despite the fact that the police never ever investigated that angle of this case at all. Because the prosecution will not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty, we will stand before you again at the end of this trial and ask that you find Karen Reed not guilty.
All right.
There you go, there you go. Absolutely to the ball, to the ball. He has explained the case right at the beginning, made it clear what the case was all about. And here we are now at the final after 3 months. And 90% of what was said by this defense lawyer, Devinietti, has proven to be true. And of course, the jury came back with and could not reach a verdict. Reason, as I said earlier, why they could not reach a verdict, because it was very confusing from the judge about the trial cards. They couldn't understand the way it was explained to them. And what we've known to now today, that the amount 12 jurors decided that Karen Reed is not guilty of murder, and there was also account number 3, which they said she was not guilty of. So I think there is only one charge left on the table, and that's count 2. So this is where we're at the moment, and the judge have to decide whether or not to, before the next trial, to throw out these 2 charges, because you cannot be charged for murder twice. So, and they have come to a decision. It's just that they were confused. The judge forced them to go back in 3 times, and the judge at no stage asked them which count are they guilty on, or which count are they not guilty on. That was not asked. As I said, there have been a lot of bias in this particular case. Lots of the bias has been against the defense, and it seemed to be a lot of help from the court towards the prosecution side. So here we are.
Defendant Karen Reed's motion to dismiss. Now comes the defendant Karen Reed, by and through undersigned counsel, and Herrick Y moves this honorable court, pursuant to the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution and Article 12 of the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, to dismiss counts 1 and 3 currently pending against her on the grounds that the jury reached a unanimous decision to acquit her on those charges and, alternatively, because there was no manifest necessity supporting the declaration of a mistrial with respect to the charges on which the jury had agreed that Ms. Reed was not guilty, and that therefore a retrial on such counts would violate the double jeopardy protections of both federal and state constitutions. Here, the very day after a mistrial was declared, undersigned counsel began receiving unsolicited communications from 3 of the 12 deliberating jurors indicating in no uncertain terms that the jury had affirmed 12-0 agreement that Ms. Reed was not guilty of 2 of the 3 charges against her, including the charge of murder in the 2nd degree. The defense respectfully submits that the jury's unanimous agreement precludes re-prosecution of Ms. Reed on counts 1 and 3 and mandates dismissal of those charges. Alternatively, to the extent the court believes further factual development is required, the defense respectfully requests that a post-verdict inquiry be held on the issue and that the court authorize defense counsel to seek additional. Regarding their having unanimously acquitted the defendant of 2 of the 3 charges against her prior to indicating to the court that they could not reach a verdict on the 3rd charge alone.